What's poppin', boys? Back with another video. I think we've gone back to back days, and now we're back here with another one. I think we're going to be posting Monday through Friday is my current schedule that I'm going off of. You know, give you boys the weekend to do what you need to do. Maybe we'll do some live streams on the weekend, especially as we get closer to redraft season, talking a little bit about draft strategy and just kind of hearing some of your guys' thoughts, and we'll kind of go from there. We are going to be continuing with our series on the wide receiver rankings, so I will be diving through my wide receivers 11 through 20. So starting off, wide receiver 11 is going to be DJ Moore. Now, DJ Moore, I feel like he's been the product child of the Dynasty community, just waiting for this guy to just fully become the wide receiver one that we know he can become. If you look back, rookie season 2019 was the wide receiver 14 on a points per game basis with 15.4. If we look at 2020, went to being the wide receiver 28 on a points per game basis at 14.1. And then, of course, last year started off super strong. We were all like, oh, DJ Moore, he's absolutely killing it. Had 162 targets, but that only equated to 14 points per game, putting him as the wide receiver 23. DJ Moore, I don't know what else to say than we're just praying that he gets a quarterback. The man literally got 162 targets, and that did nothing for him. Well, I guess it did do something. It provided for his livelihood as a wide receiver in the NFL. But it just didn't translate into the wide receiver one territory that we're just expecting DJ Moore to be able to get to. I'm just hoping that somehow he can get Baker Mayfield. Sam Darnold was absolutely atrocious. Cam Newton, poor guy, got thrown in the middle of the season and couldn't seem to still sling it. I don't know. I just hope somehow DJ Moore can be able to get the ball. Robbie Anderson didn't really do hot last year either. So I don't know. I'm just relying a lot of faith on the product, the prospect that we know he is. He is only 25.6 years old, so he will turn 26 this season. Still young, still in the prime of his career. So DJ Moore, wide receiver 11. You're just hoping that it works out. If you're contending, I might try to trade DJ Moore for maybe a little bit more reliable of an asset. But if you're rebuilding or you're kind of in the middle, can't decide what you're doing, DJ Moore is the perfect asset for you, especially as the wide receiver 11. My wide receiver 12 is going to be Davante Adams. Now, I know what you're saying. He is 29.5 years old, so he will turn 30 this year. I don't think there's any reason to worry, though. If we look, 2019, 17.6 points per game, wide receiver 6. 2020, 25.6 fantasy points per game, put him as the wide receiver 1. Last year, 21.5 fantasy points per game, put him as the wide receiver 2. I know, he's leaving Aaron Rodgers. No need to worry. He's going to our good boy, Derek Carr. They were college teammates, absolutely love each other. He is now living in Las Vegas. Man is living his best life. The man got paid as well. There's no reason to think that this man isn't going to produce. You got Darren Waller on the other side. You got Hunter Renfrow in the slot. This dude is going to be seeing single coverage all day, and this man's going to eat it up. If we look, had 169 targets last year, 123 receptions for 1,553 receiving yards, as well as 11 touchdowns. I know you can't base last year, especially with this whole new scenario that he is jumping into, but Davante Adams has proven himself to be a wide receiver 1. No reason until we see him sustain a significant injury or really start to slow down, because he doesn't really win off of being just uber athletic. He is a route god. I would expect him to be another wide receiver 1 this year, and I would honestly, if you're competing, some of the guys ahead of this, I might be trading to try to get Davante Adams, because he is the perfect win-now contending asset. My wide receiver 13 ranking is going to be Tyreek Hill. A lot happened this offseason with Tyreek Hill. Same kind of thing with Davante Adams. Gets traded from the Kansas City Chiefs to the Miami Dolphins because he wanted that huge payday, which he ended up getting. Now he is entering into, we don't know, the unknown. He is competing with targets with Jalen Waddle, which he's used to because he was competing for targets with Travis Kelce. Has a major quarterback downgrade going from Patrick Mahomes to Tua, but we don't know how they're going to necessarily use Tyreek Hill. I think it's going to be interesting to see how Mike McDaniel uses him kind of in that Debo role, which we didn't get to see a lot of because Tyreek was going down the field while Travis Kelce was kind of going underneath in the middle, whereas seeing Tyreek Hill cut across the field, even doing some backfield handoffs, flips, I don't know, it's going to be really interesting to see. If we look at his points per game basis, 2019, wide receiver 11, 2020, wide receiver 2, and then last year, I know what we thought, a lot of people thought it was kind of a down year for him. It really wasn't. He ended up as a wide receiver 6 on a points per game basis with 17.4. He really just had 9 touchdowns compared to the previous year where he had 15. Now, I don't really know what to expect other than the fact that we've heard great reports. I know we all saw that Twitter video of Tua really just underthrowing Tyreek Hill. I think they'll get those kinks worked out, and so what if Tyreek Hill has to run crossers all day, 10-yard slants, like Michael Thomas made a living off that. I can easily see Tyreek Hill being able to take some of those to the house. That is why I have him a little bit lower than maybe some people thought as my wide receiver 13. His age is getting up there, less quarterback play, new system, but I do think Tyreek Hill is still a great asset, especially if you're contending, because I think he will put up solid numbers this year and then even next year. My wide receiver 14 is going to be Drake London. Now, Drake London, rookie, coming in, top 10 draft capital. Why do I have him so high over maybe some more proven commodities that are out there in the dynasty landscape? A few different reasons. Drake London was my wide receiver 1 in the pre-draft process. Absolute killed it. I am a Ohio State fan, so of course I love me some Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson, but I do think Drake London has those prototypical wide receiver 1 alpha traits. There's only a few wide receivers in the NFL that can have. He's 6'4", weighs 215 pounds. Of course, he is 20 years old. He's about to turn 21. Dude is super young. If we look at his college dominator rating, he had a 34.9, which put him in the 69th percentile. College target share, 27.3%, which put him in the 82nd. And he had a breakout age of 18.1, which put him in the 99th percentile. Dude is a baller. If we don't remember, he absolutely killed it his freshman season. And this is the thing that a lot of people don't realize. Freshman season, Drake London, wide receiver 3, behind Amon St. Brown and Michael Pittman. Both of those guys are very, very good wide receivers in the NFL. And Drake London still produced with them as the wide receiver 3 and got targets, which is insane. Of course, last year, breaks his ankle, doesn't get to finish the season. I think he might have even gone higher if he played a full season, but we all know and see how he can perform. Gets drafted to the Falcons. Situation is terrible. Marcus Mariota, we don't know what he is as a quarterback, but what we do know is that he also has Kyle Pitts on the other side, so he does have a little bit of target share, but compared to some of the other rookies, has the best position. He's going to be the wide receiver 1 from day 1 because, of course, Calvin Ridley was suspended. But I don't think they're going to win a lot of games. And what that means is they're going to be down a lot. And if they're down a lot, they're throwing the ball a lot. So Drake London is going to be thrown into the fire this year. Is going to have to prove himself, who he is as a wide receiver. And I think when we look back into next year, Drake London's going to be an easy buy for anybody. I know he's going off as like the 2nd or 3rd pick in rookie drafts. I think that's easily something, if you can pay up to get Drake London, that's huge. But if you already have had your rookie drafts, go look to buy Drake London because next year they're going to be drafting a quarterback or signing a quarterback in free agency, and life will get better for Drake London. Hopefully. We hope he doesn't go on the DJ Moore route, but I still think Drake London, even with terrible quarterback play, will be able to produce this year. My wide receiver 15 is going to be Dionte Johnson. Now, Dionte Johnson, a lot of people are going to say, why is he so high? Last year, he finished as the wide receiver 8 on a points per game basis, averaging 17.2 fantasy points per game. But Caleb, isn't Deonte's situation worse? Pittsburgh, they drafted Kenny Pickett, signed Mr. Trubisky, and Big Ben left. The quarterback is not as good. And Najee Harris absolutely emerged as a top running back. I would agree with all those points, besides the fact that Big Ben, if you watched any Steelers game, dude had a noodle for an arm. Dionte Johnson would literally, they'd say hike. He would do like a quick slant or like some weird quick little route, and they'd throw it like 3 yards off the line of scrimmage, and Dionte Johnson would catch it and run for like 8 or 10 yards. Dude's a monster. If we can get him an offense where he has a little bit more time, the quarterback has a little bit more time to throw, Dionte Johnson can get down the field a little bit longer. I think that will really improve his air yard situation. Last year, he had 1,390 air yards, which put him pretty low on the overall air yards as a season. But if we look, he had 169 targets. Dude's a target hog for 107 receptions. The year previous, which is 2020, he had 144 targets, which resulted in 88 receptions. So dude can demand those targets, and I don't think there's any reason to think that he's not going to demand those targets. I know they drafted George Pickens, but they did get rid of Juju Smith-Schuster, which was taking up a decent target share. Chase Claypool. We'll see what happens this year, but I do think Dionte Johnson is a safe play, especially in redraft leagues, but even more in dynasty leagues. Dude is still young. He just turned 25 years old a few months ago, so he's 25 and a half, so he's still very young, especially to ride out. Hopefully Kenny Pickett can become just a decent quarterback, because that is all Dionte Johnson needs to be a top 12 fantasy wide receiver, and if he can do that over the next 2 years, I think that's super easy. So easy buy low on Dionte Johnson if you can get him right now, because I think he has that upside in dynasty to be higher next year. My wide receiver 16 is going to be Michael Pittman. Now, I know I mentioned him earlier in the Drake London take, but my man, my cousin, Daniel Hickman, kind of has me on Michael Pittman for a few different reasons. I think the fantasy community as a whole is super excited for Michael Pittman because he got a quarterback upgrade. Went from Carson Wentz to Matt Ryan. Matt Ryan really likes to target his wide receiver 1. And last year, he demanded 129 targets as a sophomore wide receiver. Had that second-year breakout. Had 88 receptions for 1,082 yards. Had 1,129 air yards for 6 receiving touchdowns. Put him as wide receiver 22 on a points per game basis. My thing is, who does Michael Pittman have to compete with? I know they drafted Alec Pierce. They got Jonathan Taylor in the backfield. Is Paris Campbell ever going to play? Those are the type of things that you wonder, but it doesn't matter because Michael Pittman is going to hold it down as the wide receiver 1 in Indy. I think there's nowhere but up. Imagine this year if he gets 145 targets, can up those receptions to 100 receptions, and gets those yards up to 1,200 yards, and even maybe scores 2 more touchdowns. All of a sudden, you're looking at a wide receiver 12, wide receiver 13 finish, finishing his 3rd season. Dude would be skyrocketing and become a top 8, top 7 dynasty wide receiver. So I think Michael Pittman has that upside. Now, of course, we're worried because the floor, we've seen the floor. It's not that high. My wide receiver 17 is going to be Terry McLaurin. Now, Terry McLaurin, a lot is going right from this offseason. When we look, the Washington Redskins signed Carson Wentz to be their new quarterback, which might just be the best quarterback that Terry McLaurin has ever played with. Now, there is a few things with Terry McLaurin why I might have him lower. A lot of people do think he's really young, but the actual reality of the situation is he stayed a long time at Ohio State. He was a 4-year senior, so he is 26.8 years old, so he's going to be turning 27. So he's not as young as you may think. He is kind of in that Stephon Diggs, Chris Godwin type territory in age where, yeah, they're sneaky young, but they're also not super young. The thing that I really like about Terry McLaurin, though, is just the potential that he has on a year-to-year basis. If you look as a rookie, put up 13.7 fantasy points, which would put him as the wide receiver 29 on points per game basis. 14.9 his sophomore season, putting him as wide receiver 20 on a points per game basis. And then, of course, put up 12.6, which is wide receiver 29 on a points per game basis last season. I think the thing that we have to consider with Terry McLaurin, of course, he hasn't performed maybe as well as we may think. I think a lot of people love to have him in their top 15, and he just hasn't shown us that he's that top 15 wide receiver. I think talent-wise, if you look, you're like, oh, dude, he's a top 10 talent in the NFL at wide receiver. I wouldn't disagree with you on that. Dude's super talented. He just hasn't been able to put up the stats to back up the fantasy points, which is what we're looking for in Dynasty. And especially with the age, those are kind of my considerations when I have Terry McLaurin as my wide receiver 17. I think he's got the upside to potentially be a wide receiver 1 this year. But like I said, I'd rather take a shot on some guys earlier, and you're going to be having to get these guys in the same rounds in Dynasty startup drafts. They're all kind of going in that 4th to 5th round. And if I had to choose between these guys, I think I would have a few guys a little bit higher than Terry McLaurin. At my wide receiver 18, I have Chris Godwin. Man, I have a man crush on Chris Godwin. Dude is a baller. Of course, we look back, 2019 sophomore season, put up 19.6 fantasy points per game, playing with Jameis Winston, airing the ball out to him and Mike Evans. Amazing. Of course, then in 2020, gets Tom Brady. First season with Tom Brady, puts up 15.9 fantasy points per game, which put him as a wide receiver 15 on a points per game basis. Super great. And then, of course, last year, just absolutely demolished in his second year with Tom Brady. Put up 17.3 fantasy points per game, which put him as the wide receiver 7 on a points per game basis. He had 128 targets, 98 receptions, 1,103 receiving yards, as well as 5 total touchdowns. If you've watched any games, I had Mike Evans and Chris Godwin on a bunch of teams, so I was cheering for Tom Brady to throw them the ball. You will know that Tom Brady targeted Chris Godwin a lot in the end zone, so 5 touchdowns seems like a little bit lower than what you may expect. Now, of course, he did have that ACL tear in December at the end of the season. If we put him on a 9-month recovery, he should be returning around week 3 to 4. Now, no pressure on that. We are playing Dynasty. The man is still only 26 years old, and we do assume that Tom Brady's going to be here for this year. We don't know about next year or the years after, but he does have that 3-year contract. So Chris Godwin just seems like a really safe bet for me. If you're a contender, I would try to go buy him, and if you're a rebuilder, Chris Godwin also fits that mold because he is going to fit into that time frame if you're doing a 1 to 2, 3-year rebuild. I think the other thing that we have to think about this year when we're looking at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers is the fact that no Antonio Brown, and they're saying Robert Gronkowski was retired. I think he'll come back at some point, but I imagine that's probably going to be week 10, week 12, when maybe they need a lift. Chris Godwin's going to be back by then. Chris Godwin's going to be getting 25, 28% of the targets, and if he gets that, he's going to get the most targets that he's seen in a long time since that wide receiver number 2 finish that he had back in 2019. So I would expect Chris Godwin to be really performing this year. I usually don't like to draft wide receivers right off an ACL tear. But the thing with Chris Godwin, we have to remember, dude walked off the field with it. I thought maybe he pulled something or twisted his knee or something. Never expected a torn ACL by the way he was acting on the sidelines. So that would be my recommendation. Try to see if you can buy him. And if you have him, you're not going to be able to sell him high. So that is why I have him as my wide receiver 18. At wide receiver 19, I have Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson, of course, Ohio State alum, playing next to Chris Olave, Jackson Smith, and Jigba, which is 3 wide receivers that are going to be all drafted in the first round when it's all said and done. Garrett Wilson had a college target share of 26.3%, had a breakout age of 20, and of course, had a college dominator rating of 29.4%. Garrett Wilson, what a dog, had a 40-yard dash time of 4.38, and then of course gets that top 10 draft capital, which we all love to see, going to the New York Jets. Now, we may not like the landing spot as much because I do like me some Elijah Moore, and we don't exactly know what's happening with Zach Wilson. And then, of course, they draft Breece Hall in the second round, which may mean that they're going to be relying on the run game a little bit more. Hey, I don't care. My thing is, Garrett Wilson might be the most talented wide receiver in that room, and if not, he is 1B to Elijah Moore's 1A, which is going to open everything up on the field for Zach Wilson. So as long as Garrett Wilson can put up a solid wide receiver 3 season, I see there's no reason for Garrett Wilson not to have that breakout in year 2, which typically happens with these rookie wide receivers. Of course, we would love to see that year 1 breakout, but the thing is, I think that's baked into his cost, and that is why I have him as my wide receiver 19, because you do have that upside long term. I think he does have that Calvin Ridley type build. He's not necessarily an alpha, but he's not necessarily a beta either. I think that Garrett Wilson has the upside to eventually become a top dynasty asset. It's just going to take some time for that to happen. My wide receiver 20 is going to be Mike Evans. Now, Mike Evans, of course, no stranger to the wide receiver fantasy leaderboard. Man is an absolute legend, of course, putting up 1,000-yard after 1,000-yard season. He's getting up there in age, and I think that's what's worrying a lot of people. Of course, he is 28 years old. He'll be 29 by the end of this season. But the thing that we have to consider with Mike Evans is, even though every year he seems to pull a hamstring, every year he ends up as a wide receiver 1. If you're a contender, Mike Evans, throwing a late first to try to go get Mike Evans is going to be totally worth it, especially this year. Kind of hinting at what I talked a little bit about in the Chris Godwin takes. Mike Evans is in a prime position. It's only going to be him, Russell Gage, and Chris Godwin for the majority of the season. Mike Evans isn't going to have to compete with anyone due to the Chris Godwin injury. It's going to be him and Russell Gage. So all the targets are up for Mike Evans. If we know, he has been getting a lower target share year by year basis. So if you look at targets, of course, 2019 had 118. 2020 had 109, and then 2021 he had 113. The thing that I look at, if Mike Evans can get anywhere in that 130 to 140 target range, all of a sudden he goes from a wide receiver 9 to 10 to like a top 5 wide receiver, which is why everyone's talking. Again, he's so hyped for these best ball drafts and things a lot in redraft leagues. Mike Evans is going to be a smash, and that's what I'm hoping for this year, and that's why I still have him as a wide receiver 20, because even though he is going to be 29, you still have maybe 1 to 2 years left of that elite level production before things start to fall off. The cliff usually happens around wide receiver 29, but I'm still banking on the fact that you're going to get 1 to 2 more wide receiver 1 and maybe 1 wide receiver 2 finish before things kind of just hit the can there for Mike Evans. But Mike Evans, what an incredible talent. He's on his way to the Hall of Fame, and that is why I have him as my wide receiver 20. Thanks so much for stopping by to my 4th video this week, talking a little bit more about my top 20 wide receivers. Tomorrow we're going to be talking about 3 buy candidates for rebuilding teams, as well as 3 buy candidates for contending teams. Thanks so much.